The Whitaker family's perfect life crumbled like a house of cards in an instant. Each new twist in this story only reveals the horrifying truth that is impossible to accept until the very end. Kenton Whitaker was extremely happy in his family life. He met his future wife Tricia on a blind date when he was only 20 years old. He would later say that he fell in love with her at first sight, thinking he wanted to spend his entire life with her. Soon, a beautiful wedding followed. Tricia was an elementary school teacher, a kind and gentle woman who surrounded everyone with care. Kent had his own construction business. On the significant date of December 31st, 1979, the family welcomed their firstborn, Thomas Bartlett, or Bart. 3 years later, their second son, Kevin, arrived. Tricia loved children, and it was her love for them that motivated her career choice. Tricia's close friends and colleagues, Barbie Harrington and Peggy McLean, knew that becoming a mother was her sincere desire. So, when she had her own children, the only thing she wanted at that time, in her own words, was to be a good mother. She left her beloved job and focused solely on raising her own children. With her husband, they moved to Sugar Land, Texas, to raise their sons. It was the perfect quiet suburb 40 minutes southwest of Houston. Everything here was impeccable. Everyone had large, beautiful homes, good jobs, expensive cars. It was like in American commercials, where the product being advertised is presented with the image of an exemplary family. Neighbors behind the white fence spent Friday evenings with barbecue on the neatly trimmed bright green lawn. Together, they decorated the suburb for holidays, invited each other for birthdays, Christmas, and other significant dates. It was in such a, perhaps even refined and cloying, environment that the Whitaker boys grew up. Kevin was a physically strong teenager. In school, he was an athlete, participating in several different sports: golf, baseball, sports gymnastics. He was very popular and sociable. The older son was very charming with an excellent sense of humor. Everyone around considered him cool, especially Kevin's friends. He was an example for many. Bart loved riding bicycles with Kent the most. During these rides, they talked about everything on equal terms. Together with his father, they covered almost 40,000 kilometers. They went to the desert, the mountains, places where snow lies almost year-round, rode through forests, crossed entire states, and even visited Cancun, Mexico. Bart excelled in school. Soon after graduating, he finally decided on his future career, choosing Sam Houston State University with a specialization in criminal justice. He dreamt of a legal career. It was a highly prestigious education. The word prestige could indeed describe the entire life of the family. Kent mentioned that at that time, they were a happy family until the following happened. In early December 2003, Bart informed his parents that he had successfully passed his final exams. On December 10th, the entire Whitaker family went to a restaurant to celebrate this wonderful occasion. It was one of the happiest evenings in recent times. Kent and Tricia were very proud of their son. The waitstaff, upon learning the reason for the celebration, wrote congratulations on a plate. But the main surprise was an expensive gift from the parents, Rolex watches. Kent knew that Bart had been dreaming of them for several years. A smile never left his face. After a wonderful dinner with champagne, fresh seafood, and desserts, the family headed home. Kevin opened the front door and entered the house first. Suddenly, a shot rang out unexpectedly, and the younger son immediately fell in front of his mother. The shocked woman only managed to say, "Oh no." In the same second, the sound repeated, and she collapsed next to him. The door was wide open. In front of Kent and Bart stood a man. His face was covered with a ski mask. Now he aimed at the head of the family and struck him with the next shot. Kent instantly found himself on the floor. He recalled that the bullet entered his shoulder, feeling like a very strong blow. He almost didn't feel the pain at that moment. Fear took hold of him when he heard the fourth shot, now aimed at his older son. He looked up and saw Bart, bleeding, clutching a mobile phone, dialing 911. It turned out that Bart literally jumped on the shooter, getting shot in the shoulder as well. He managed to wrest the gun away. Where the attacker was now was unknown. Kent remembered that he almost immediately heard sirens in the distance, which gave him strength. He heard his wife moaning in pain nearby, but couldn't even move. He didn't know where Kevin was, didn't know where Bart was, and what happened to them. Kent could only pray. He still remembers what he asked for then: "If it's my time to die, I'm ready. It's okay. But protect my family." A rescue helicopter was called, primarily for Tricia, who was on the brink of life and death. Kent heard from the police that there was one body. He realized that one of his sons was no longer alive. In the late hours, the streets filled with concerned neighbors. Many heard the shots. Now they saw police cars with flashing lights at the driveway of the Whitaker family home. This has never happened in this area before. 19-year-old Kevin, whose whole life was ahead of him, a handsome and kind guy, was shot on the doorstep of his home. He lay in a pool of blood. The arriving paramedics couldn't do anything. Kevin died instantly, having received a bullet to the chest. Tricia, Kent, and Bart, still alive, were urgently taken to the hospital. In the hospital, Kent came to and saw his parents. He said at that time, "I feel like my wife is dead." "Is that true? Tell me the truth." The parents confirmed that it was. His beloved Tricia had passed away. She died right in the helicopter, not making it to the hospital. So, on a day that started so well, Kent lost his son and wife. Peggy McLean, Tricia's friend, said, "I lost a friend who taught me how to be a better teacher and a better mother. She was just a very good person, and I miss her so much." Bart, like Kent, was wounded in the shoulder and lay nearby. Kent looked at him and decided that he would stay strong for his surviving elder son. At that time, forensic experts were working in the Whitaker family's home. They found a 9mm Glock pistol. It had no fingerprints, as the shooter wore gloves. One of the gloves was found on the street, on the curb next to the road. There were no witnesses. No one saw how the perpetrator got inside the house, and no one saw how he left. Initially, without specific details, everything looked like a burglary with a break-in. Apparently, the family returned home unexpectedly from dinner, catching the burglar off guard. Typically, in such crimes, a group of criminals operates, with one person on lookout, informing in advance that the family is returning home. The second person inside the house tries to leave the crime scene quickly. Even if a person works alone, in a robbery, they rarely use a weapon, let alone kill multiple people. But such incidents still happen, usually in panic. Perhaps the thief thought there was no other way out. The house was not broken into. What seemed strange, Detective Marshall Slott noticed that in Kent and Tricia's bedroom, the dresser drawers and closet were open, all at the same distance, very neatly. Usually, a robber pulls out drawers entirely, throwing them on the floor. It's much more convenient and quicker to see if there are any valuable items. None of the valuables inside the house were moved. Electronics and jewelry remained exactly in their places. The most significant thing that raised suspicion, the murder weapon, was the Whitaker family's gun. The gun safe was broken into. It was in an isolated part of the house in Kevin's room. Someone had to know about it, no other way. Detective Slott was convinced that the robbery was staged. And now let's remember the small, cozy suburb where the family lived. It seemed like there couldn't be any envy here, as all the residents were approximately at the same, quite high, standard of living. In such places, people share a lot with their neighbors. All neighbors enter each other's homes. One family's celebration is often a celebration for the nearby residents too. If the motive isn't about money, and the theft is fake, then perhaps it's revenge, and maybe someone local did it. Perhaps Kevin told someone and even showed that he had a gun, that it was stored in his room and at his disposal. It was necessary to get to know the Whitaker family and their surroundings better. The truth turned out to be much worse than the detective could initially imagine. Something happens that throws the police off the idea of revenge. It's probably still a theft, but committed by an inexperienced thief. The thing is, literally within a day, the same small suburb experiences another robbery, but this time without victims. In such a short period, when the entire police force is on high alert and in the same location. What kind of desperate behavior, apparently indeed that of a newcomer. Late one evening, an unknown person entered a house near the Whitaker residence, pulled out a gun, and began threatening the two peacefully sitting hosts in the living room. He demanded that they give him everything valuable immediately and put it in his backpack. Then he rushed out of the house and ran. That evening, the police managed to track down the fleeing criminal. They started the pursuit. The criminal, surrounded by the police, hid in the garage of one of the houses. But realizing there was no way out, he shot himself. The suspect in the murders was identified. It was 20-year-old Jerome Liddum Brown. Jerome already had legal issues. He served time for dealing with illegal substances. It was necessary to find out if he was connected to the shooting at the Whitaker's home or if all of this was just a very strange coincidence. Specially trained dogs were called in. Could they connect, by scent, the glove found at the house on the street and the gun from which all 4 shots were fired with this young man? If you touch any object even once, it will forever carry a scent trace, as in the Debbie Dykes case. The olfactory organ, the nose of a specially trained service dog, is used as an analyzer. Several dogs worked with the police, and none of them detected a connection. If you trust the dogs, then it turns out that Jerome Brown had nothing to do with the shooting of the family. It's really just a coincidence. On December 14, 2003, the police asked Kent and Bart to return home. Only a few days had passed, and the father and son had to relive everything. In the video recording made by the police, they show how everything happened. In general, Kent and Bart were very helpful to the investigators and were involved in all processes. A few days after Tricia and Kevin Whitaker were shot, over 1,000 people gathered to bid them farewell, and each of them was a potential suspect. Shortly after, the police, investigating the Whitaker family and Bart himself, learned the following. It turns out, Bart wasn't a graduate, he was a freshman. He performed poorly academically, skipped classes a lot, and the dean was leaning towards dismissing Bart already in his first year. The police decided to immediately inform Kent about this. Bart told his father that he was very afraid to admit it to his parents. As he put it, he was just afraid that his perfect family would be disappointed in him. The father was furious, but more because any lie would now focus suspicion on Bart. Initially, the police already suspected Kent. Kent thirsted for revenge, and now the police started circling around his only surviving son. The media went crazy, and the news soon became known throughout America, but very soon it would be known worldwide because the murderer would turn out to be someone whose cold-bloodedness would shake everyone. On December 15th, around 11:30 p.m., Detective Slott received a call at his home. On the other end of the line was the duty sergeant of the police, and he said, "Hey, someone is waiting for you here, he wants to talk to you." Detective Slott met the stranger in the dark parking lot behind the police station. The stranger said he had information crucial to the Whitaker family case. The stranger Detective Slott met in the police parking lot was Adam Hipp, a longtime friend of Bart. He told the detective that Bart approached him several years earlier with a detailed plan to murder his family. It was a drawing that Adam Hipp made for the detective during their 3-hour conversation. It was clear from it that Adam Hipp was supposed to shoot family members entering the house one by one in the corridor, killing each one. Dinner was a trap, a snare that all family members were supposed to fall into. According to Adam Hipp, the plan even included shooting Bart himself to deceive the police. Bart wanted Adam to shoot him in the shoulder. He should look like a victim, not a suspect. All of this was supposed to resemble a failed interrupted robbery. In a subsequent interview, it turned out that Bart promised his friend a large sum of money for the murder of his own family. Bart himself planned to receive over $1 million as insurance after the death of his relatives. Adam knew so many details that the police couldn't believe he wasn't involved. Detective Slott asked Adam where he was that late evening. The guy replied that he was at work that night. This information was confirmed. Adam indeed worked, and he was almost 400 kilometers away from the horrifying events. His presence in the city of Dallas at that moment was recorded by a bank camera. Detective Slot asked Adam to call Bart, talk to him about this. Detective Slot needed Bart to at least hint at his involvement in the phone conversation. Adam calls Bart and tells him that the police contacted him and he needs to come in for questioning. What should he do and say? Detective Slot asks Adam to call back later with the following words: "If you want me to keep quiet at the police station about your plan, I need money." Bart agrees to give all the money he has at that moment. The money was supposed to be left in Adam's mailbox, which Bart did. This way, Bart confirmed that the plan did exist. Detective Slot understood that if Adam refused, Bart could make the same request to another close friend who isn't afraid of money. Slot decided to check two of Bart's closest friends, Chris Brosshire and Stephen Champagne. Chris Brosshire and Stephen Champagne worked with Bart at the Bend Water Country Club in Conroe, Texas, an hour's drive from Sugar Land suburb. Bart worked in the bar. A few months before the murder, Bart spent almost all his free time with these two guys. According to their words, of course, they knew nothing and heard nothing about the plan. At that time, the police were obligated to report the results of their work, or more precisely, the incredibly frightening truth, to Kent. His life was in danger. And he had no idea that the deadly threat came from his closest person, for whom he decided to remain strong. Of course, Kent didn't believe Detective Slot, who personally came to talk to him. Bart and Kent lived together, and their bond was stronger than ever. They supported each other, talked a lot, and were constantly together. It's amazing how boundless human hypocrisy and deceit can be. Kent had no doubts about his son's innocence. One evening, Bart told his father that he needed to see his girlfriend. Bart promised to return the next morning, but he never came back home. The police almost immediately found Bart's abandoned SUV. The door was open, the car was running, but the owner was nowhere to be found. Bart disappeared. He was afraid that the police had caught up with his friends. Kent discovered that all the money he had accumulated over many years had disappeared with his son. He still believed in his son, thinking that the frightened guy ran away from suspicions, and without money, it was impossible to do so. Bart was just scared, but he didn't commit the murders. Although terrible doubts had already started creeping into his head. A reward of $10,000 was offered for any information about Bart. The police station received numerous calls, but all of them turned out to be useless. The police lost the opportunity to arrest Bart Whitaker, the man who killed his own family. 10 days after Bart's escape, Kent contacted the police. It turned out he received a letter from his son with the following content: "Dad, there's so much I want to say, but I can't find the right words. I've decided to leave, despite all the advice I've been given. There are many reasons for my departure, but I don't intend to wait for the moment when they all come crashing down on me. I just know that I can't allow and won't allow anyone to go through all the horror of the coming weeks alongside me. I'll go through all the trials with God's help, and that will be enough for me. If I manage to redeem all my sins, I'll start anew, from scratch. You know, I love you very much, and everything I managed to do with God's help is thanks to you and everything you taught me in the last few months. Forgive me. I love you. Bart." The content of the letter was quite veiled, but Kent then recounted that he understood his son was the perpetrator of the murder. A part of the man had already died on the night of the shots to his loved ones, and now it seemed that he had lost everything. Kent recalled sinking into a chair and crying for a long time. At that moment, the police were getting closer and closer to the truth. Detective Slot asked Chris and Stephen to provide what the police call scent samples. Using dogs again, he compared these samples with the evidence collected at the crime scene. Detective Slot's intuition proved correct. The dogs indicated that Chris Brashier's scent was on the boxes that were opened that night. His scent was everywhere, but most importantly, Chris's scent was found on the weapons used in the murders. With just the scent, no one could be accused. A confession was needed. Chris refused to answer questions in the interrogation and was very nervous. His speech was incoherent and disjointed. Stephen was also unwilling to share any information. But investigators noted that Stephen was clearly more morally flexible. He was the one they could break. The police tapped Stephen's phone and began to question him frequently. According to phone calls, Stephen began to complain to his loved ones that he found it difficult to bear such pressure, that he was depressed, and so on. The police were definitely on the right track. It took a long time, but finally, their work paid off. After a year and a half, Stephen told what he knew. He called Detective Slot himself and said he was willing to talk to him about something very important. He reported that he participated in the crime. Stephen admitted that he was the driver and stood outside the house with the lights off. He heard the 4 shots. Chris Brosshire was the shooter, and Bart Whitaker was the organizer. After the shooting, Stephen and Chris went to the bridge over the lake in Conroe to get rid of the evidence they had collected in a large duffel bag. For all this, Bart offered a large sum of money, $10 million, which they would share between them. But they didn't receive a penny. Kent, upon learning this information, said that such money does not exist in his family. Bart was deceiving his friends. And the insurance amount was not that large. Bart will admit in the future that he was simply offering people what they wanted most. A few days later, Stephen led Detective Slot to a real treasure trove of physical evidence. He showed the exact spot where they disposed of the bag. 3 days later, in the dark waters of the lake at that location, a team of divers indeed found it. It contained Chris's clothing worn at the time of the crime, including the second glove, ammunition, radios, and a safe-cracking tool with a weapon. In September 2005, the Sugar Land police arrested Stephen Champagne and Chris Brosshire for the murders of Tricia and Kevin Whitaker. However, they still didn't know where to find Bart. Due to the arrests, the media stirred once again. Appeals for help in finding Bart were broadcast very frequently. And it yielded results. A man called the police, introducing himself as Rudy Rios. He claimed to know where Bart was. He himself helped him get there. Rudy Rios and Bart had worked together in a restaurant in Houston. Bart had once told him that he was under pressure from law enforcement. They suspected him of a crime he didn't commit. He needed to run. Rudy said he could help. According to Rudy Rios, Bart paid him $3,000 for the escort. But when it became known about the $10,000 reward for Bart's capture, Rudy simply wanted to get paid again. So, Bart headed south to Mexico. He ended up in a tiny village, about 70 kilometers from the Texas border. Bart started his new life with around $7,000 in cash money he stole from his father's house. He could speak a little Spanish. He had a small apartment and a job at a local furniture store. He also had a new identity. Now he was called Rudy Rios, the name of the person who brought him here. He enjoyed drinking beer in the evenings and getting to know the local girls. Bart also found his job through acquaintance with one. He was a very good, responsible, and diligent worker. He told everyone that he supposedly got a bullet scar in Afghanistan. It seemed the whole village embraced him. He was a favorite in these parts. The family Bart worked for grew fond of him. Bart once told them that they were his family, one he never had. He said he was the only child and that he never loved his mother because she never loved him. His mother was a woman of loose morals. For 14 months, Bart lived a carefree new life as Rudy Rios. The police established contact with Mexican law enforcement. Bart was arrested and sent back home. Kent first saw his son after the escape in his town through bulletproof glass. Bart said then, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault." Kent replied, "I love you, and I forgive you." In March 2007, the trial began. Bart faced one of the toughest prosecutors not only in Texas but in all states, Fred Felkman. Prosecutor Felkman is convinced that Bart is a sociopath, feeling nothing, a manipulator, and a pathological liar. Nothing bothers him. He was born that way, and not difficult circumstances influenced him. Prosecutor Felkman intends to seek the death penalty. It's a unique case, a double murder, where one of the victims passionately defends the accused, the same person who tried to kill him and took everything from him. Kent said in court, "If the state imposes the death penalty, and if it eventually happens, then I will be a victim again, losing the last member of my family." In court, Bart was asked the long-awaited question that concerned everyone: why? Bart had previously said it wasn't for the money. Bart answered, "I always felt that any love my family gave me was conditioned only by the standard. I never felt it." Prosecutor Felkman called his words complete crap and stated, "There's no evidence that this family ever did anything bad to him. They loved him unconditionally." Bart hated his family, was obsessed with the idea of executing them. Investigators learned that the 2003 attack was not the first time Bart tried to kill them. We already know about the plan revealed by Adam, but there were other attempts. In December 2000, Bart approached his college roommates, Will Anthony and Justin Peters. They even agreed initially, but things didn't go according to plan, and the guys got scared. Except for Bart. By April 2001, Bart had a new conspiracy idea. Jennifer Jaffet, a college acquaintance of Bart's, learned about it and reported it to the police. The police told parents about this call then. They said it was some unsuccessful joke, a misunderstanding, and promptly forgot about it. Kent didn't remember until he was reminded. The police didn't take it seriously either. This information got lost. In court, Bart admitted that after the incident, his father became his best friend. Kent, in turn, managed to understand his son. He said, "I think he came to the conclusion that he hates himself and hates his life. He was under the pressure of perfection. Perhaps he thought that if his family is no more, he can become free and live a real life." During the trial, Bart addressed the prosecutor, "Do you really not believe that a person can genuinely regret what they've done?" Prosecutor Felkman replied, "Of course, I believe. Just not you. I think you regret getting caught, and now you just want to escape the death penalty." It took the jury more than 10 hours to reach a verdict. Bart Whitaker was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Over the next decade, Kent tirelessly lobbied the state to replace his son's death sentence with life imprisonment. However, when Bart's appeals were exhausted, his execution was scheduled for 6 p.m. on February 22, 2018. A week before his son was supposed to die, Kent, now remarried, made a final desperate plea for clemency to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. Just 2 days before the execution, the board announced their decision to grant clemency. But the final decision had to be made by the state governor. And as the day of execution arrived, there was still no word from him. Kent went to visit his son one last time. They touched hands through the glass and said their goodbyes. Bart had his last meal. He was taken to a special room, and they were about to strap him to the gurney. And then, less than an hour before the planned execution, Governor Greg Abbott spared him. Kent recalls that moment, "We were all praying. And suddenly, before 6 p.m., my phone rang, and they told me the execution was stopped. We were screaming with joy." Despite the pain Bart caused his father, it was Kent who fought for him until the end and achieved the desired outcome. Today, Bart is in prison in Beeville, Texas, and he will never have the possibility of parole. Together with his second wife, Tanya Youngling, Kent regularly visits his son, talking to him through a glass partition. Chris Brashear will be eligible for parole in 2035 when he turns 53. Stephen Champagne is already free. While no one knows if Bart's remorse was genuine, his polite, friendly behavior behind the barbed wire amazed the guards so much that some of them wrote letters requesting clemency for Bart. The frighteningly insensitive manipulator once again managed to win everyone over.